If you have children or grandchildren who have reached the age of 5, more than likely they have already been indoctrinated by the evolutionary theory. And the reason that I can say that with such confidence is because there are not too many young people who are not absolutely enthralled with the dinosaurs. In fact, if you think about it for just a moment, young children love dinosaur figurines. They love books about dinosaurs. And so from a very young age, they fill our homes with all kinds of paraphernalia. In fact, I would suggest that if you're a parent and you haven't stepped on a dinosaur figurine in the middle of the night, then maybe you're not quite yet a parent. But in all seriousness, follow the life of a child for just a moment. 3, 4, 5 years old, they already learn their names. They enter the school system, and somewhere around the age of 9 or 10, they begin to take field trips. Field trips to museums, places like, for instance, the Smithsonian Institute there in Washington. Or maybe they go to the Fernbank Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. Or maybe they head over to the Field Museum in Chicago. The Field Museum where Sue is on display. That massive T-Rex. Now I want you to think, these children are 9, 10, 11 years old. They're gathered around these very familiar skeletals. They're gathered around these massive dinosaur skeletons. They're reading the placards. How many of their parents do you think actually considered what those young children would be reading on the day of that field trip? Because you see, I've actually been in museums on those days when school buses gather around. And I've watched as young children, they read those placards, and I've even got pictures of the placards they read. And I promise you, there is no way to harmonize what is on that placard with what is written in the Bible. So by age 9, 10, 11, they've already soaked up field trips. And then you start adding scholastic books, chapter books, into their vocabulary. Suddenly our children are enthralled with books like The Magic Tree House, or maybe The Magic School Bus. In those particular books, our children are introduced to characters who travel back in time or who go on great adventures. And sadly, they're indoctrinated with evolution. But it's not just young people. It's not just children who are amazed by these creatures. Adults too. You think about how many magazines, month after month, they grace their covers with an image of what we believe these amazing creatures look like. Young and old alike. We are absolutely amazed by the dinosaur. The question has been raised many times, how can you believe in creation? How can you believe in the Genesis account of creation and believe in the dinosaurs? Sadly, what we used to do in the past was we simply said they didn't exist. In fact, I have run across people who, on many occasions, they talk about meeting Christians who tried to tell them that dinosaurs weren't real. Friends, make no mistake about it, dinosaurs were real. We know that. We have found their fossilized remains on all 7 continents. Arctic to Antarctic and everywhere in between. It doesn't do our children, our grandchildren any good to teach them that dinosaurs didn't walk this earth. And then we send them off to a museum and they come face to face with a 2-story tall T-Rex skeleton. Oh, dinosaurs were definitely real. In fact, the very first dinosaur discovered, as far as recent times is concerned, happened around the year 1822. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Gideon Mantell, he and his wife, they loaded up into a horse and buggy. They traveled down to visit a patient. This was back during the days when doctors still would make house calls. While Dr. Mantell was inside tending that particular patient, his wife, Mary Ann, she decided she would go take a stroll. And as she was out there strolling along, she came across a pile of stones that had been placed there purposefully to fill in the ruts caused by the spring rains. She noticed that one of those rocks looked like a giant tooth, but it was much, much too large to be a tooth. She gathered it up, she took it back, showed her husband. He was amazed, had never seen anything like it. They went back to where those rocks had been cut from that quarry, and they found more teeth and more bones. 1825, Dr. Mantell named that long-dead creature Iguanodon, meaning literally iguana tooth. For, you see, it looked like the tooth of an iguana, only it was much, much larger. Just a couple of short years ago, I was in New Zealand. The city of Wellington has a museum, in fact, where that particular tooth is being held. They allowed me to go down into the basement of that particular museum, view it, connecting roughly 150 years between the Mantells and today. 150 years ago. Roughly 1845, a fellow by the name of Sir Richard Owen, he believed that there were once a tribe of these huge reptile-like creatures. In fact, it was Sir Richard Owen that came up with the term dinosaur. He used two Greek words, dinos, sauros, translated by him as fearfully great lizard. And that's really when our fascination with these creatures began. The question before us today is not, did the dinosaurs walk the earth? Because we know they did. The true question is when. If you think back, 1822, Dr. Mantell, they found a tooth all the way up into the current time. Hundreds upon hundreds of dinosaur bones have been discovered. They've been discovered in places like Alaska, Texas, Europe, Australia, all around this planet. Some have argued in the past that maybe God buried them in the dirt for us to find later. Friends, our God is not the God of chaos or confusion. These were true living creatures, magnificent creatures that once literally roamed this globe. As I said, the question is not, did the dinosaurs exist? The real question is when. During this time together, what I want us to do is look at some evidence that you aren't going to find in your child's textbook. You're not going to hear from the latest CNN news blurb or read in Time magazine. What I want to do is show you some facts, some evidence. Some things that I hope that you'll share with your friends, your co-workers, things that should help you to see firmly how all of this fits in to God's creation account. Philip Kitcher wrote a book many years ago called Abusing Science, The Case Against Creationism. In that particular book, he claimed that if solid evidence of humans and dinosaurs were discovered, that it would shake the foundation of the evolutionary theory. I want you to remember that quote, that it would shake the foundations of the evolutionary theory, because we're going to look at some evidence that's going to do just that. In order to make sure that we are all coming at this from the same perspective, I need to make sure that you understand right now in government schools, our children are being taught that dinosaurs walked this earth 65 million years ago. They died out. And allegedly, 3 million years ago, man came along carrying his club, living in a cave. And yet the Bible teaches a totally different scenario. Genesis chapter 1, it details that all land-dwelling creatures were created on day 6. And in fact, man was created on day 6. If that's the case, and it is, then the greatest amount of time that could have separated dinosaurs from mankind would be, give or take, maybe 23 hours. Now, for some people, they would absolutely recoil at the thought of that. They hear that man and dinosaurs were only separated by just a short amount of time, and they literally bristle at the thought of that, because they have already become so ingrained and indoctrinated by the evolutionary theory. I would ask you, before you stiffen your neck, before you harden your heart, join me as we examine some evidence together. For instance, January 2005, American researchers discovered a dinosaur that had been eaten by a mammal. It was a fossilized mammal that had a dinosaur in its belly. Now you say, yeah, Brad, so what? What's the big deal? Folks, remember the evolutionary timeline. According to that theory, mammals didn't come into the picture until millions of years later, and yet we've got a mammal that was eating a dinosaur. Or maybe somebody could explain the Ica stones of Peru. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Javier Cabrera was given one of these stones as a birthday present. There's a doctor down in Lima, Peru. He looked at that stone. He noticed it had elegant carvings on it. He went back to the farmer who had discovered that particular stone and given it to him. He asked him, he said, "Where'd you find this?" And the farmer explained, he said, "Those are burial stones that the ancient Incan Indians used to place in their tombs." In fact, Javier Cabrera remembered his father owning such stones. He set out to find as many of them as he could. All told, he found about 11,000 of them. And over a third of those 11,000 show very elegant pictures of dinosaurs on them. But folks, not just dinosaurs. There's dinosaurs and men. And you say, this is just an evolutionary or an internet hoax. In fact, if you go online, there may be some websites that try to tell you that these are a hoax. But I would ask you again to evaluate the evidence. You see, the early Incas got things right that we've only just recently uncovered. For instance, they were placing dermal frills on the back of these sauropod dinosaurs. Dermal frills. Something that researchers didn't discover until the year 1992. Other stones had these bumpy rosette patterns on the back of dinosaurs. And again, researchers looked at that and said, that's not accurate. We've never seen that. That was until we found some fossilized skin from a dinosaur that had those bumpy rosette patterns in 1998. You see, folks, the early Incas got it right the first time. It's only been within just the last decade or so that we have learned the rest of the story, so to speak. My question would be, how did those early Incas know what to draw if they had never seen those particular creatures? Or maybe somebody could explain to me the dinosaur figurines from Acambaro, Mexico. If you were to go there today, there's a mountain called El Toro, the bull. And it's at the foothills of that particular mountain that a gentleman, he was riding on the back of a horse, and from that elevated position, he saw the first of these ceramic figurines. Now, all told, they found roughly 30,000 of these. And again, many of them so well detailed, you can actually tell what kind of dinosaur it is. Ironically, they sent these pieces of these dinosaurs off to two laboratories here in the United States to try to have them dated. They want to know, how old are these things? So they sent it off to the University of Pennsylvania and a place called Teledyne Labs. They really wanted to try to narrow down exactly when the culture who had made these particular figurines was living. Came back with dates of roughly 2000 BC. 2000 BC. that would imply that men had been living with the dinosaurs. So they sent 8 additional samples to be what's called thermoluminescent tested. They really wanted to make sure they had this thing right. Sure enough, it came back with dates of roughly 2000 BC as well. It was at that point that they called both laboratories. They said, hey, you know that material we're sending you? It came from dinosaur figurines. At which point, both laboratories did the same thing. They withdrew their results. They said, we're sorry, we're unable to give you any accurate readings on your material. But in 1990, one of those institutions got caught, so to speak. University of Arizona. 1990, the University of Arizona was sent some dinosaur bones. They weren't told that that was what it was. They were simply told this is a blind study. We'd like for you to date this material. They did. Came back with dates of roughly 9,000 years before present. Now, granted, 9,000 years is not precisely 6,000. But folks, that's a far cry from 65 million. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the Buddhist temple in Cambodia, 800 years old, that was just recently uncovered there in the dense jungles. Men stumbled across this temple, and folks, you can't fake this one. Vines had completely covered it up. They came in with what you and I might call industrial strength Roundup. They pulled back the vines, they burned them in a pile, and when they did that, they noticed elegant carvings all over this temple. A couple of friends of mine, preachers from the Denver area, have actually had the opportunity to visit this firsthand. They've given me several of their pictures. And they showed me how the man who had built this particular temple, he carved things intricately, like, for instance, a monkey. Or he carved a deer. But he didn't just stop with monkeys and deers. He also carved dinosaurs. Dinosaurs so specific that you can look at it and tell precisely what type of dinosaur it is. For instance, a stegosaurus. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the dinosaur petroglyphs in National Bridges National Monument. If you were to go there today, just outside of Blanding, Utah, there are 3 natural sandstone bridges, one of which is called Kachina. It's on that particular sandstone bridge that early Anasazi Indians, they carved all kinds of things. For instance, if you were to go there today, there's a sandstone bridge called Kachina that has got bighorn sheep on it. But they didn't just stop with bighorn sheep. They also carved dinosaurs. In fact, an evolutionist by the name of Fran Barnes, he is an authority on rock art in the American Southwest. I want you to listen very carefully to what he said regarding this particular petroglyph. He said there's a petroglyph in Natural Bridges National Monument that bears a striking resemblance to a dinosaur. Now, why do you think he didn't just call it a dinosaur? Remember what Philip Kitcher said. Solid evidence of humans coexisting with dinosaurs would shake the foundations of the evolutionary theory. It's on that same particular bridge that we find other creatures, even things like flying reptiles. You remember those pterodactyls, pteranodons? I want to share with you 2 quotes that I hope you will remember. They're not real flashy. They don't have a lot of picture to them. But to me, they pack a massively powerful punch because they're coming from historians. They're talking about these flying reptiles. Now, again, bear in mind, evolutionists would have us believe that pterodactyls, pteranodons, that they lived 65 million years ago, that they died out with the dinosaurs during the age of the dinosaurs. And yet, I want us to go all the way back to the 5th century BC, when a historian by the name of Herodotus, listen to what he said. Herodotus said, "There's a place in Arabia to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. And when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and like as possible to the wings of a bat." You see, Herodotus knew. He knew that these flying reptiles were real. But he's not the only one. In fact, many of you may be familiar with a historian by the name of Josephus, Jewish historian. A Jewish historian who actually lived during the time that many of the apostles were walking the earth. Josephus was a man who chronicled the life and death of Jesus Christ at the hands of Pilate. But he also talked about those flying reptiles. Listen carefully to what he said. "When the ground was difficult to be passed over because of the multitude of serpents, which it produces in vast numbers, some of which ascend out of the ground unseen, and they also fly in the air, and they do come upon men at unawares and do them a mischief. He said, Moses made baskets like unto arks of sage, and filled them with eaves or birds, and carried them along with them. Which animal is the greatest enemy to the serpents imaginable? For they fly from them when they come near them, and as they fly, they're caught and they're devoured by them." All right, so let me get this straight. The same historian who wrote about a man named Jesus Christ being crucified by Pilate is also writing about flying reptiles? Friends, what does that do to the evolutionary theory? Keeping in mind, Josephus wrote this long before Charles Darwin was ever even a thought. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the tomb of Richard Bell. If you ever get over to Carlisle Cathedral in England, let me encourage you to walk through it and ask them to roll up the carpet that you see there, right in the middle of the cathedral. Below that particular carpet, there is the tomb of a man who died in 1496. Now, bear in mind, the word dinosaur itself came into existence roughly, in round numbers, 350 years later. So here you've got a guy who dies in 1496. With that carpet rolled up, you'll see that beautiful marble elegant tomb where the tomb maker had carved all kinds of animals into it. Animals that you can very easily distinctly tell. For instance, a fox or an eel, a cat or a dog, and even dinosaurs. Roughly 350 years before the word dinosaur was even coined. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the textiles from the Nazca tombs. A friend of mine by the name of Dr. Dennis Swift, he actually goes down there fairly regular basis to do digs. He keeps trying to get me to come with him. Our schedules are conflicting nonstop, but he shared with me this last time, he said, "Brad, we discovered what we believe is a child's raincoat, where there's a dinosaur embroidered in the bottom of it." Now again, the question becomes, how did these Nazcas know what to sew or draw or paint if they had never seen it? Or maybe somebody could explain to me the discovery of Dr. Samuel Hubbard. Dr. Samuel Hubbard was not a religious fundamentalist by any means, not a preacher. He was not a creationist with an axe to grind. Dr. Samuel Hubbard, he was the curator for the Museum of Natural History in Oakland, California. He set out to prove what he thought about the American Indians. Dr. Hubbard believed that they had been on this continent much longer than we were giving them credit for. So he set out on an expedition down into the Grand Canyon. They went off one of the side canyons to the Havasupai Canyon. And he began to look for things like their pottery or clothing, anything that would prove that, yes, those Indians had been here. And lo and behold, he was right. He found their pottery. He found their clothing. But he also stumbled across their cave art. Etched into those canyon walls, there were pictures that had taken men literally hours to carve out. And you say, okay, Brad, pictures of what? Well, let's see. There was buffalo, sheep, dinosaurs, oxen, men. Wait a second, run that list by me one more time. It said buffalo, sheep, oxen, men, and dinosaurs. In fact, I want to read to you what Dr. Hubbard had to say regarding his find. He said, taken all in all, the proportions are quite good. The huge reptile is depicted in the attitude in which man would most likely see it, reared on its hind legs, balancing with a long tail, either in a fighting position or feeding position or a fighting position, possibly defending itself against a party of men. He goes on to say, the fact that some prehistoric man made a pictograph of a dinosaur on the walls of this canyon upsets completely all of our theories regarding the antiquity of man. The fact that the animal is upright and balanced on its tail would seem to indicate that the prehistoric artist must have seen it alive. Now, I want to show you a picture of exactly what Dr. Hubbard found, and I hate to be the one to tell you, but folks, if you look very carefully, it's not a cow, it's not an ox, it's not a sheep, it's not a man, but it's an awfully good representation of a dinosaur we now know existed called the Edmontosaurus. Again, the question falls, how did they know what to draw? Or maybe somebody could explain to me the soft tissue that was discovered in a T-Rex bone not too long ago. A lady by the name of Mary Schweitzer made this discovery. I actually communicated with her about it. Turned out that discovery was literally a serendipitous event. They had the long bone, the femur of this T-Rex. They had encased it in plaster Paris. They wanted to take it back to a laboratory. They rented a helicopter. The helicopter landed. Lo and behold, that block of material, it was too big. It physically would not fit into the helicopter. So she realized they were going to have to break it. They decided to cut it right down the middle. And when they did that, they were able to look inside that T-Rex bone where they found soft tissue, blood vessels, and what she believes may be blood cells. And friends, you ask any molecular biologist worth their salt at all, they're going to tell you soft tissue, blood vessels, blood cells, they don't stick around for 65 million years. You see, we have the evidence, but whether or not our young people are going to be exposed to it is a whole different matter. We have burial claws from Peru dating back roughly 500, 700 AD that clearly show dinosaur-like creatures on it. We've got the Roman murals from the 2nd century AD showing two long-necked dragons. Bear in mind, folks, that's hand-laid tiles. Hand-laid tiles by men who were living basically one generation after the apostles. We have the Mesopotamian cylinder seal that looks an awful lot like what you and I would call an Apatosaurus today. Or maybe somebody could explain the tablets that are attributed to Narmer, the legendary first pharaoh of United Egypt, that clearly show dinosaur-like creatures on it. Do you get the point? We could go on and on and on, but I think the point has been made. Friends, dinosaurs coexisted with man. In fact, an honest person who evaluates the evidence recognizes the fact that, yeah, there's ample evidence out there. Consider for just a moment, though, what that actually does to the evolutionary theory. Friends, with that one discovery, you've wiped away 65 million evolutionary years. You now have men and dinosaurs together. Somebody says, okay, Brad, that's nice and all. But you're going to teach us that God created man and dinosaurs on day 6 together? Absolutely. Then why aren't they mentioned in the Bible? Hope you'll join us next time where we'll explore that particular question. Why aren't dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible? But I hope that you won't miss this point. Evidence exists. Humans, dinosaurs, we coexisted. Our children need to be aware of that evidence and need to understand what it means in relation to the Genesis account of creation. I implore you, examine the evidence. It's there.